Welcome back. Day 2 started out with me doing a little bit of research that I was copying and pasting from the internet to find out if the FBI and the U.S. Marshals work together. And as you see there, their work often overlaps because what I was thinking is maybe instead of the U.S. Marshals being the one sort of in charge of this sting operation, which I may or may not have mentioned in the previous recording, that maybe the FBI, or maybe I just said that the FBI is doing it. So based on that, I'm thinking that Paul, who is Holly's supervisor or boss, whatever, could pretty much be in the dark, which would make him not so much as a jerk when Holly finds out the truth. And I'm also thinking maybe Paul gets killed somewhere along the lines. I haven't exactly decided for sure. So you can kind of see my ideas that I'm typing out there. Someone had mentioned that I should switch this so only like 9 or 6 or 4 squares show up. But I found out, oddly enough, when I do that, the font does not get bigger. The point size stays the same. So a little bit weird. But anyway, so hopefully you can read this. If you can, if you're watching it on a phone or iPad or something, good luck. You definitely need at least a laptop full screen. So that's kind of my thought process going through this part. One thing I haven't decided is if, which I may have mentioned, it's going to be the father or the grandfather, but I think I've pretty much decided on grandfather for reasons that I may not have mentioned, but I may mention later when I actually start writing. So now I realize that I have all of these aren't quite beats, and they're certainly not all the scenes, but I have a pretty good outline really of what I want to do. And now what I'm discovering, I'm fixing some errors here, adding them to the dictionary, I should say. And somewhere in here, I discover that when I go into that index card view, it doesn't always match up. Sometimes I'll type something and it won't work, so I have to come back and fix it. And so there's some of that. I also found out, I don't think I found it out yet. Oh, there we go right there. I'm kind of finding out how similar their career paths are and just making sure I really want her to be a U.S. Marshal. It's interesting, U.S. Marshals don't make nearly as much as FBI agents in general. So I'm just going through some details to find out if they would run a sting operation, and I found out here that they do, which was pretty cool. So that gives more credibility to the whole idea that the U.S. Marshals and or the FBI could work together on something like this. Now you can obviously read it a lot better. Here I'm going through and just giving myself an idea of how many people will have sort of major speaking roles. And then, like I say, a very, very brief, not really character description, but just sort of, what sort of a character arc, just sort of to get an idea to make sure that all the characters aren't similar, which is interesting because I've got twin boys in here. And so you obviously think, well, they're going to be very similar, but I'm trying to get away from that because it would be pretty cool if, even though they look the same, they're quite a bit different. And so you can see these are ideas. I'm not just thinking these up as I go along, but these are ideas that I've sort of been thinking of probably over the past. Well, for the twins, they were in this pilot that I wrote a while back. So, gosh, I bet that's been a year. It's probably been 2 years since I wrote that. So I have them pretty firmly in mind for reasons that I may have mentioned. And then the Abby character was also in this no accident pilot. So her character is changing a little, and she right now is probably the weakest one. I don't know. Paul, I don't have it here, but it's morphed into, which you'll see later. He is sort of going to be an uncle figure for Holly in the same way that she is sort of an aunt figure for Lexi. The difference being that Holly knows that Paul isn't really her uncle, but he was in the military with her father, and her father may have died in the military or afterwards. But so, they have, it's not father-daughter, but it's sort of that uncle thing. So I thought that would be interesting. You see, I've got a lot of stuff under the mom. For right now, I'm calling her Rachel. You can read all about her backstory there. But like I think I said yesterday, character development has historically been one of my weaker things, I believe. And so, here's a very key thing. I'm thinking about the mother's motivation and the fact that the FBI will pay informants. And so I'm like, ding, ding, ding. So I copied and pasted that. And there we go. The FBI approached the mom at some point, and they're going to give her some big bucks if she can help bring in this guy. And so her thought process is that, what a way to sort of kick off a new life with my daughter or impress her or something. Although, as you can imagine, that may not work out. And now I'm seeing, when you think of Marlon Brando and The Godfather, he was never in jail, and other big mob crime lords, whatever you want to call them, typically don't go to jail. So I'm thinking here that the grandfather is sort of the Godfather-ish, whether it's, an actual Italian mob or whatever, it doesn't really matter. And so the son either, went to jail and is still in jail. Maybe he got killed while in jail or something. And so the grandfather wants to know if Lexi is his real granddaughter, because if so, she's like the last of the bloodline, and he would want to keep her as close as possible. I don't know. He would realistically think he could talk her into sort of joining the crime family, but at least wants to keep her close, just out of, fatherhood or whatever. So now I'm thinking about Paul, and there is the part about the uncle, which I think can work out pretty cool. And he, as I said, maybe he dies. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm thinking that possibly he does. And maybe the mom, there's one scenario under which the mom sacrifices her life. And now here's something interesting. I don't know if I want to give it away. What if the mom saves Holly's life? Maybe takes a bullet for her or whatever. That might be kind of interesting. So now, as you see, I'm starting to jump back and forth, fixing some more typos, and getting it ready for maybe some actual screenwriting. Because, as I said, I just love it when I start to write fade in. I was trying to think over the weekend how many times I've written fade in and not completed a script. That would be interesting to hear, either in the comments or whatever, from all of you guys out there. How many times have you written fade in, not just obviously sat down and written it without a screenplay to go behind it, but how many times have you written fade in and not completed the story that you thought would make a good screenplay? And I don't have a solid answer. I've got a whole folder of scripts. Probably, I don't know how many scripts are in there, 30 or 40 screenplays. And I know of at least 2 or 3 that I haven't finished. But I don't know that I ever wrote fade in, because I don't know if I ever actually got to the screenplay part of it, or if they just were outlines and stories and stuff. I think at least one of them I did start a screenplay, but I don't think I ever had the end in mind. I guess the better question would be, how many times do you have the beginning, the end, and pretty much the structure and everything, and you don't complete the screenplay? That would be very interesting to hear. If it's 50% or whatever, it'd be pretty interesting. So now I've gone down and I've just gotten all of the 15 beats, actually more than that, from Blake Snyder's Strike the Cat and Strike the Cat. Strike the Cat. That's a Freudian slip. So now I'm just trying to go through and just in one or two sentences, I'm trying to summarize these beats in here. And when I typically do this, I start out with great intentions and I do a sentence or two. And then as I go on, they get longer and longer because what the requirements story-wise of the beats get longer and longer. But I seem to be doing a pretty good job here. You notice under theme stated, I've got choices matter, which seems extremely weak. But when you think of themes, there really aren't that many themes. There's revenge, there's true love conquers all, there's, be careful what you wish for, the grass is always greener, that sort of thing. Choices matter is maybe too of a blanket generic, but to me, I typically don't really even think of a theme when I'm writing. Sometimes I do, I guess. But usually it evolves. And then many drafts in, I'll say, oh, okay, now I get it. And then I'll try to sort of write that into the early part of the script. So I've got a pretty good idea right now of my opening, my setup, the catalyst. Sort of the debate gets a little fuzzy. The break into 2 is when Holly, like I said, hands off or washes her hands and thinks she's going on to something bigger and better. And now I'm sort of going back to my former cards and copying and pasting them or retyping them into the new ones. And it feels like something is missing here. In between, the trick is the B story and fun and games are coincide, but they last, 25 or 30 pages. So that's a pretty big stretch to just have 2 cards for. But I have a feeling, I'm pretty confident that I've got enough oomph in there because quite a bit has to happen. Holly has got to go off with Paul, and then the kids have got to find out that Lexi and Larry are gone. And then they've got to tell Holly, and then Holly has got to kind of decide what she's going to do. And then she has got to, find out from the FBI and from Paul that they've been messing with her. So right now, this is where I mentioned that just weird stuff is happening and all of my writing is not coming over into this version. So that's what's happening now. And then when we get into bad guys close in this case, it's literally, the bad guys have already closed in. They're pretty much there already. So that's what's happening here. And then we've got All Is Lost, which is probably when, I'm not sure if that's going to be when the FBI / U.S. Marshals raid the place and they just get totally mowed down, perhaps. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I see myself. I sped this up 5 times, so whatever time this video takes is really about 5 times longer. So now I'm writing the script. I wrote fade in and I'm writing the script. I looked up on the internet strong last names for women. I think it was specifically for women, and Hart was one of them. Holly Hart, that's kind of, I don't know, I might change it. I'm not. Most of the time, my names are kind of interchangeable. They're not like Dash Riprock or something where it just, Marty McFly or something. So I'm trying to give the impression, without doing a bunch of editorializing and overwriting, that Holly is kind of a tough lady, even though she's young, not spectacularly beautiful, but attractive, whatever. and setting her up that we don't know if she's good, we don't know if she's bad. She's in the back of this van with these guys. They look like they may be ready for some sort of drug thing. Maybe they're kidnapping someone. And then I actually thought of that. Are you ready for this? Will come to have a double meaning, because what he's really asking her, although we don't know it yet, spoiler alert, plug your ears if you don't want to know, is that he's not saying, are you ready to go and grab the girl? He's saying, are you ready to be this little girl's caretaker for the next 15 years? I'm sure no one will get that, and maybe when you watch the movie for the third or fourth time, you'll say, oh, that's so clever, Jack, you're such an excellent writer. But anyways, and of course all this dialogue is subject to change, and probably will, because this is literally my first pass through it. I'm not 100% sure that she would wear a mask. It's obviously to kind of throw the audience off that, maybe she's a bad person. So I'm not 100% sure. Another thing is, I'm debating about, I give this little girl a name Kendra. And my question is, after this, she's going to be known as Lexi. I just call her a little girl, but she's going to have a couple lines of dialogue before she becomes Lexi, before Holly christens her Lexi. So how do I handle that? Any thoughts or suggestions would be appreciated. I didn't want to tie her down to being exactly 3 or exactly 4, so hopefully I want someone who is old enough to deliver a couple lines of dialogue, but not 5 or 6. I think I said that before that I think that was too old. The other thing I'm not sure is, in that interior house night scene, if I want to specify that it's Holly, because to the girl, it's just a masked figure. But that's not a big deal. Obviously, it is going to be the Holly character. Comes in, she's a little apprehensive. I'm thinking she grabs the girl, and, she's not, maybe at this point we get the idea that she's not just snatching her for kidnapping, even though she doesn't bring the stuffed animals, which she could. I thought about that, and maybe still will, but I'm thinking that at least she brings the blanket and, the girl doesn't wake up. So we think, well, that's interesting. So the 2 men are taking the mom, and they all come down the steps. The 2 men go one way with Rachel. Holly comes the other way. Now, what you notice in my writing is I always try to write in an active voice. That means no is's or r's, very few ands. I've been schooled on that. So, 100% proper English, probably not. This isn't how you would write a book, certainly. But, short sentences, commas, periods, a lot of white space. Try to just keep it going. I like to think that I'm sort of directing the movie with my writing. And I think I picked that up maybe after writing the 3rd movie that I actually made. So you don't have to say camera follows so-and-so or close-up of so-and-so. But if your description is Holly wheels around, the director's going to go, okay, we need a shot of Holly turning around. So you can sort of direct in your writing without using camera directions, which for the most part are pretty much a poo-pooed idea. I would not suggest it unless it's super, 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 super important. So there's a little dialogue, as you saw, between Rachel and Holly. And the idea there is something's going on. Obviously, Rachel knows what's going on. She's not going to come out and say it, but we get the idea. So Kendra gets shocked. Holly says, "Your Aunt Holly," and Kendra, what are you going to think? You don't know you have an aunt. You know you're not with your mom anymore, but you somehow kind of take a liking to this lady because you're not old enough to really be terrified, because she picked you up and she nicely took you out and put you in the blanket. And now, of course, Kendra is saying, wait a minute, my name is not Lexi, it's Kendra. And then Holly delivers the key line, not anymore, which hopefully gives us a little hint of what's going on. Something's going on. Blender Live tutorial. So then I think when I say the little girl, now Lexi, hopefully that makes sense. I don't know 100% for sure how I'm going to handle that, but I think that will work. As you see, I've gone back just as the mood strikes, changing a little bit of dialogue, and you can that I like ice cream line, which again might change, but I'm thinking that Lexi, for whatever reason, is already so comfortable with her that she's dismissed. She's basically showing no fear. She goes back to sleep, and when she does, Holly, the brave, happy face she's put on fades a little, because now it's sort of now the work begins. All right, so here, 15 years later, I don't know if I'm going to notice how I didn't put late 30s. I put later 30s. I'm not sure. I think I would say the actress was probably 37, 38. I haven't said 15 years later, and I don't know that, as long as it's identifiable as Holly, I don't know that it would need to be said 15 years later. So she's obviously, as I say, she's more fit and as attractive. So she is not let herself go by any means. And what I'm thinking is, so she's been babysitting, not seriously, but virtually babysitting this girl for 15 years. And so now she knows that it's coming to an end. And so as she's punching, she's like, one more day, which hopefully kind of is obviously exposition, but also tells us how she's feeling about it. Paul Steely, how do you like that name? So he comes up, and time flies, obviously an ironic or not really sarcastic, but some sort of sentence. Then I thought somewhere when I was writing, when he says the patience of Job, that would be a fun transition into job, which is why he's there, so he can tell her about the new assignment. If your father could see you now, a glorified babysitter, he'd have another heart attack. I don't know if that's too on the nose, but hopefully that tells us that probably Paul and her father had some sort of common past or something. Holly's describing exactly what she considers herself having been doing, and then we probably find out that her father died of a heart attack. And I don't know if that transition that Holly says, speaking of Job, with a short O, and hopefully the audience would say, oh, Job, oh, that's very interesting. You're so clever. So he pulls out an envelope. We don't know what exactly it is. And his line at the top of line 4, that just purely came off the top of my head. So that is super on the nose. But I think if you ever have to deliver super on the nose exposition dialogue, and you can do it obviously as quick as possible, but also in a little different way, instead of, her reading it or him saying it super seriously, but I'm picturing him like a newscaster. This just in, U.S. Marshal's 15-year stint qualifies her for a plum assignment. There's certainly other ways to do that, so I'll be thinking about that. She almost wonders, this is supposedly to hint, not that it's too good to be true, but it's kind of hitting her that yes, her work here is just about done. And she reads it. We don't know what it is. I think we're going to find out later, but I won't give that away yet. And as she's reading it, she just wants to make sure, based on merit, not favoritism. And Paul, being that silly guy he is, gives kind of hopefully a funny answer, but yet We don't really know if he's joking or if she deserves this or not. And then J. Pats, whoops, oh, that's the end of, wow, that's the end of the recording. That J. Pats is the U.S. Marshals sort of fleet of planes. And I'm not even sure what happened at the end because it ran out before I was done. But let's pretend there's a still frame of that. And you can kind of see how that plays out. The idea being that tomorrow at this time, she'll be long gone and her new job will begin. That was day 2 of screenwriting, which actually began the screenwriting, my favorite part. So let's see what happens next. Thanks, and I hope this doesn't become too cliched, but right on.